When you immediately, I do thank you very much, Mrs. Ford, for remembering that I was connected with this family, and getting an invitation for this conference was a high privilege for me. But I recognize that once you're back, and you never get out, all of the people here, of the public eye. You know, just a brief story, about 10 to 7 this morning, I was in the bathtub and the phone rang, and I bounced out and answered the phone. I thought it was my husband. And it was a very nice lady from Grand Rapids who'd read a story from yesterday. And she was very interested in finding out the kind of garlic pills my grandmother used to take, because they were supposed to improve your memory.
Continuing effect.
Wonderful. So that's the kind of, I mean, that's an interesting thing that did happen, but I mean, I'd forgotten that kind of thing could happen to me. But I remember similar, very nice things. She's a very nice lady. And happening to my mother, of course, all her life. And my uncles.
We appreciate all that you've shared with us, because it's given us an entirely different insight. We have from 50 years out of the White House to 20 years out of the White House to 10 years out of the White House to fresh out of the White House, you might say. So you get this continuing, and I think it's very important you're here to see that there is, because it has a tremendous amount of the impact of the position of the family, as well as we've mostly read about the man himself, and of course that's most important, but it's for historians pretty interesting to see these other things. Speaking of the fact that this runs through our whole period, I'd like maybe for you to talk about, if you would, maybe we could, about the feeling, the mutual feeling that there has been, I think, this whole 2 days, as we always had, even though we were campaigning on opposite sides of the political fence. I know for myself, and I never felt, as far as Rosalynn Carter was concerned, that there was really no friction between us, as far as I felt, and I think you expressed that same thing, that people do their own thing, but there is a sorority-ship that once you've been living in the White House, and I would like us all to perhaps speak on that.
Well, I think
mutual.
That's right. I think there's a relationship with other first families for having had the experience. But I also think that there is a feeling for, I have a real feeling for those political wives who are out there now campaigning for the presidency. Because I've been through that, and I know it, and I sympathize with all of them, on whether I support them or not. And you have that feeling with people who live in the White House. The experiences are there, the pressures are there, you have the same problems with your family, with children. I think the ages of your children, I think, have a lot to do with the way they accept living in the White House. Jeffrey was 18 when Jim was elected governor. He did not want to make one new friend because he did not know whether the friend liked him because he was Jeffrey Carter or because he was the governor's son, which is the same thing that Luci said. When we came to the White House, Amy had moved into the governor's mansion at 3. When she was 4 years old, she came into my office in the governor's mansion one day and said, "Would you check my schedule and see if Libby can come play with me?" Well, a schedule is normal for her, but for a teenage person who's thrown into the situation, who has to do the teas and the receptions and have a schedule, very difficult. And I think we experience that with all of our children. We experience our relationship with the press, with the public. We are recognized when we go out, and we all, I think, kind of have a rapport because we do go through those things together.
Luci, and that mutual respect, so to speak. I've seen it among you girls, certainly. You've all had great sympathy for each other, and I feel particularly sorry for you. All those restrictions.
No, mine has been an especially privileged life. I think that one point I would have liked to have made, if I can be so brazen as to go back to the point that you were discussing a little earlier about do you feel as a result of having been the daughter of that there is maybe political impact or some things that you can achieve that you might not have been able to achieve otherwise? I think with every privilege in this life comes a certain sense of responsibility. And my father and mother both raised us to believe that to whom much has been given, much is expected. And I have always found it just a wondrous opportunity, a blessing. Sometimes a challenge, and on occasion, a bit of a heavy challenge. Burden maybe is too hard a word. The fact that there may have been some things for some greater goods that I may have been able to have affected more change as a result of the fact that I was known. My work, for example, in Volunteers for Vision and being able to formulate visual screening organizations all over the country, I'd like to tell you it's because I have such an incredible skill with being able to put organizations together. And we've been able to go in and screen thousands of children all over. I'd like to think that the Visual Screening Act that we got in Texas was a result of the fact that I had such manipulative abilities and such a convincing rapport that I was able to plead my case and make it effective and have Texas become the 25th state in the union to have mandatory visual screening to help the children of my community. But I know darn well that's not true. I know that I'm piggybacking on a reputation, on a legacy that my father and my mother created together, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. And if I can do well with that effort, if I can somehow reflect meaningfully on it, then maybe, you know, in some small way I feel that I have warranted it. So that is my reaction to that portion of it. There is no doubt to me, I will always feel a tremendous sense of empathy to anybody and everybody who inhabits 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, a great regard for the presidency as an office, and a feeling like, you know, there are not an awful lot of us, just pure numbers. When my former husband went away to Vietnam, I looked out for a support system, like I know many people whose husbands were in World War II. Well, lots of women who are in this room whose husbands were in World War II, you looked around for people who were in similar situation as yours, and there were lots of you. You know, you could get together and talk about the problems of raising children without a husband in the home, etc., etc. Well, when I looked around, when my husband was gone, that I had very few, nobody. The only person I knew whose husband was at war was Lynda. And she was a tremendous source of support to me. Well, I think a lot of it's like that for those of us who've been members of First Families. We look out there for people who understand what it's like and who've been there, and there are not many of us. And politics and policy aside, we've got to be able to empathize with each other because we may be all we've got sometimes.
Unless anyone wants to address one of those more, I'm going to go on. I'm going to try and cover different subjects this morning, sort of as a wrap-up. And one of the subjects that we barely touched on was periods of crisis. And I'm going to ask you to think about the crisis, whether let's talk about international level, perhaps first, and then, or as you please, emotional or personal type things. Certainly living in an atmosphere that is such a fishbowl, we've all decided, can't help but bring personal crisis, and with the international situation, we know unfortunately those are always very prevalent. And Lynda, I guess you're sort of next on the list here. We'll keep going back and forth.
Well, I remember coming back from California, and after I'd put Chuck on the airplane to go to Vietnam, and I was pregnant, but it was a secret. I couldn't even get everybody's sympathy. And I wasn't feeling very well, and I'd flown all night, and I got off the plane, and my parents met me, and it was, you know, it was very, very early. And I remember, you know, I went upstairs and went to sleep. And then when I got up, I found that my father had decided he wasn't going to run again. And I did everything I could to try to get him to change his mind, because I felt personally that I was being let down. I mean, I wanted him to continue, because I mean, it was, my husband was over there now, and I felt he would get him home. And I believed in what we were doing, and I felt so very strongly about that. And that was a big crisis for me. And, you know, to be supportive, to understand, to try to understand why he was doing what he was doing, and yet part of me was saying, but I wish he wouldn't. And I was torn to some extent between my father and my husband. And that was a crisis, I think, for me.